Story number 1. The Cold War Vault. I always thought my curiosity about abandoned places was a harmless quirk, a way to escape the monotony of everyday life. But nothing could have prepared me for the horrors that awaited my friends and me beneath the arid sands of White Sands, New Mexico. What began as an adventurous exploration quickly spiraled into a nightmare we couldn't escape. It was a scorching summer afternoon when Mike, Sarah, Tom, Laura, and I decided to take a detour from our road trip to visit White Sands. The vast desert stretched endlessly before us, the white dunes shimmering under the relentless sun. We had heard whispers about an old Cold War-era vault hidden somewhere in the area, a relic of a bygone era meant to protect officials in the event of a nuclear catastrophe. The allure of uncovering hidden history was too tempting to resist. Imagine what secrets are buried down there, Mike mused, his eyes gleaming with excitement. This could be epic. Sarah, ever the skeptic, raised an eyebrow. You mean like secret tunnels and government conspiracies? Tom chuckled. Maybe. Or maybe just some old bunkers and forgotten paperwork. Laura, our de facto leader, nodded. Either way, it's worth checking out. It's not every day you get a chance to explore a real Cold War vault. Equipped with flashlights, a couple of spare batteries, and a basic map we'd pieced together from old records and local legends, we set off towards the coordinates Mike had found online. The journey was arduous, the desert terrain unforgiving, but our excitement kept us moving forward. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, we finally arrived at the location marked on our map, a concealed entrance partially obscured by sand and overgrown shrubs. The heavy metal door was rusted and battered, its surface scarred by years of neglect. This must be it, I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. Mike stepped forward, pulling out a crowbar from his backpack. With a few determined strikes, he managed to pry the door open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Here goes nothing, he muttered, leading the way. The air grew colder as we descended, the temperature dropping sharply from the scorching desert heat above. The stairs were steep and narrow, the walls damp with moisture from the underground. Each step echoed ominously, heightening our sense of unease. At the bottom, we found ourselves in a large, dimly lit corridor lined with heavy steel doors. The walls were bare, save for a few faded posters warning of radiation and containment protocols. Dust motes danced in the beams of our flashlights, adding to the eerie atmosphere. Looks like we're not the first ones here, Tom observed, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. We began exploring, opening door after door, each one revealing different sections of the vault. Some rooms were empty, mere storage areas, while others contained old furniture and remnants of lives once lived. It was the deeper we ventured, the more unsettling the environment became. In one particularly grim room, we found rows of metal cots, each accompanied by a small locker. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay. On one of the cots lay a tattered journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. I picked it up, flipping through the fragile pages. The entries detailed the daily lives of soldiers and officials who had been stationed in the vault during the height of the Cold War. But as I read on, the tone grew darker, revealing accounts of psychological experiments designed to test the limits of human endurance and loyalty under extreme stress. Guys, look at this, I called out, showing them the journal. They were conducting some twisted experiments down here. Sarah frowned, her skepticism waning. This is messed up. We need to be careful. Ignoring her caution, Mike continued to explore, his curiosity driving him deeper into the labyrinthine structure. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed through the corridor, startling us all. What was that? Laura asked, her voice trembling. Before anyone could respond, the vault began to shake, the walls groaning under some unseen pressure. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the lights flickered violently, casting long, dancing shadows across the rooms. Something's wrong, Tom said, backing away from the door. We need to get out of here. We turned to leave, but the corridor had changed. Doors that had been open were now sealed shut, and the layout seemed to shift, disorienting us. Panic set in as we realized we were trapped in an ever-changing maze. Let's stick together, I insisted, trying to keep my voice steady. We'll find another way out. But every attempt to navigate the corridors only led us back to the same central area, the walls closing in tighter each time. The feeling of being watched intensified, and a heavy silence enveloped us, broken only by the distant sounds of dripping water and our own frantic breathing. As night fully descended, the vault transformed into a realm of darkness and despair. Our flashlights struggled to penetrate the thick shadows, and the air grew thick with an oppressive weight. It was then that we heard the voices, a soft, ethereal whisper that seemed to emanate from the very walls. "Join us, join us!" The whispers grew louder, more insistent, their haunting pleas echoing through the corridors. We huddled together, fear gripping our hearts as we tried to make sense of the inexplicable phenomena. "Did you guys hear that?" Laura whispered, clutching Tom's arm tightly. Before we could respond, the lights went out, plunging us into complete darkness. The temperature plummeted, our breaths visible in the frigid air. Panic turned to terror as we realized the doors were now locked, the vault's automated security system preventing our escape. A voice crackled through a hidden speaker system, its tone cold and mechanical. "Welcome to the final experiment. Participation is mandatory. Please follow the instructions." Mike, ever the bravado of the group, stepped forward. "What experiment? Who are you?" "There is no one here," the voice responded. "The experiment is self-contained. Your compliance is essential for the success of the mission." Desperation set in as we tried to comprehend the situation. The vault wasn't just abandoned, it was a living, breathing entity, intent on keeping us within its confines. "Let us out of here," I demanded, my voice breaking with fear. "You can't keep us here forever." The voice remained unmoved. "Escape is impossible. The experiment must continue." Suddenly, shadows began to materialize around us, dark figures taking shape in the dim light. Their forms were indistinct, flickering like smoke, but their presence was undeniable. They moved towards us with purpose, their silent steps echoing through the vault. "Who are you?" Tom cried out, backing away from the approaching shadows. The shadows didn't respond, their intentions clear. They were here to ensure our participation in the experiment. The oppressive atmosphere thickened, making it difficult to breathe, and the whispers turned into haunting cries that pierced our souls. "Join us, join us!" Laura began to sob uncontrollably, her fear overwhelming her. "We need to find another way. We can't stay here." But the vault's layout continued to shift, doors appearing and disappearing, leading us deeper into the heart of the facility. The psychological experiments documented in the journal now seemed like a foreboding prophecy, a dark hint of the horrors we were about to face. In a moment of clarity amidst the chaos, I remembered the journal's entries about the importance of understanding the motives behind the experiments. Perhaps there was a way to appease the entity controlling the vault, to find a solution that didn't involve succumbing to its will. "We need to communicate," I said, trying to steady my voice. "Maybe if we understand what you want, we can help you." The voice responded, its tone still cold but slightly less menacing. "Your participation is necessary for the continuation of the experiment. Resistance will result in termination." Desperation fueled my determination. "What do you want from us? How can we help?" There was a pause, the silence heavy with anticipation. "Completion of the psychological parameters is essential. Cooperation will ensure your survival." Understanding dawned on me. The entity controlling the vault was conducting a psychological experiment on us, testing our limits, our resilience, and our ability to maintain sanity under extreme conditions. It was a twisted extension of the experiments documented in the journal, a never-ending cycle of testing and torment. "We won't participate in this experiment," I declared, my voice firm despite the fears that threatened to consume me. "We're not your subjects." The voice seemed to falter, the system struggling to process our resistance. "Compliance is non-negotiable. Return to your designated areas." The shadows advanced, their presence more menacing than before. The oppressive weight of the vault bore down on us, the air thick with despair. It was then that I realized the true nature of our predicament. We were trapped in a loop, forced to relive the horrors of the past, our every move monitored and controlled by the vault's malevolent intelligence. "We need to break the cycle," I whispered to my friends, my mind racing for a solution. "If we can disrupt the system, maybe we can escape." Mike, though shaken, nodded in agreement. But how? We don't even know how this place works. In a desperate bid for freedom, we decided to split up, each taking a different route in hopes of finding a weak point in the vault's defenses. The thought of being alone in the vast, dark corridors was terrifying, but our collective fear pushed us to act. I took the left corridor, my flashlight cutting through the darkness as I navigated the ever-changing layout. The walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, and the whispers. Story number 2. The Echoes of Raven Rock. I always considered myself a skeptic. As a seasoned journalist, my life revolved around uncovering truths, debunking myths, and presenting facts to the world. Supernatural tales and ghost stories were mere fodder for fiction writers, not the hard-hitting reality I dealt with daily. That was until I decided to investigate Raven Rock, Pennsylvania, a place shrouded in secrecy and whispered rumors. Raven Rock, nestled deep within the Appalachian Mountains, was known officially as the Underground Philadelphia, a massive underground facility built during the Cold War to serve as a fallback headquarters in the event of a nuclear catastrophe. Its existence was an open secret, but details about its operations and the lives of those who worked there remained elusive. Over the years, stories emerged about strange experiments, unexplained disappearances, and eerie occurrences within its labyrinthine corridors. Determined to separate fact from fiction, I set out to uncover the truth. My journey began with hours of research, sifting through declassified documents, interviewing former employees, and piecing together the fragmented history of Raven Rock. What I found was a tangled web of government secrecy, questionable experiments, and accounts of individuals who had vanished without a trace. The more I delved, the more my curiosity morphed into an obsession. I needed to see it for myself, to walk its halls and witness the truth firsthand. Securing permission to access Raven Rock proved challenging. The facility was heavily guarded, and access was restricted to authorized personnel only. After persistent efforts and leveraging every connection I had, I managed to obtain a temporary pass under the guise of conducting a thorough investigative report on Cold War-era military installations. The guard at the entrance, a stern man with eyes that seemed to pierce through my very soul, barely glanced at my credentials before waving me through. The entrance to Raven Rock was deceptively unassuming, a nondescript door embedded in the side of a mountain, surrounded by dense foliage and the distant sound of rushing water. As I stepped inside, the air grew colder, the fluorescent lights overhead humming with an unsettling resonance. The lobby was sparse, furnished with functional, utilitarian furniture that spoke of a place built for efficiency, not comfort. A large map of the underground facility dominated one wall, dotted with various markers and notes that hinted at the complex's expansive layout. I was escorted to an elevator that descended far below ground level, its doors opening into a dimly lit corridor that stretched endlessly in both directions. The walls were lined with reinforced steel, the floors made of cold, hard concrete. The scent of dampness and stale air filled my nostrils, and the oppressive silence was broken only by the distant echoes of footsteps and the faint hum of machinery. As I ventured deeper into Raven Rock, the corridors seemed to twist and turn in impossible ways, defying any logical map I had studied beforehand. The facility was vast, a sprawling network of tunnels and rooms that seemed to stretch into infinity. My flashlight flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls, playing tricks on my mind. It wasn't long before I stumbled upon the first signs of Raven Rock's dark past, bloodstains on the walls, old medical equipment abandoned in haste, and cryptic notes scrawled in ink that read, "They are still here." A chill ran down my spine as I pieced together the meaning behind those words. Who were they? And why did the facility feel so alive, as if the very walls were watching me? Determined to find answers, I pressed forward, my footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Hours turned into days as I navigated the maze-like structure, documenting everything I encountered. Each room told a different story. Some were research labs with remnants of bizarre experiments, others were living quarters now overtaken by nature, plants growing through cracks in the walls and floors. The further I went, the more unsettling Raven Rock became. It felt like the facility was designed to disorient and trap those who dared to uncover its secrets. One night, as I sat in what appeared to be a common area, reviewing my notes, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping sound coming from somewhere deep within the facility. It was faint at first, barely noticeable over the hum of the ventilation system, but it grew louder, more persistent. My heart raced as I tried to locate the source, but the corridors seemed to stretch and change around me, making it impossible to pinpoint the direction. I followed the sound, my flashlight guiding me through the darkness. The tapping led me to a heavy steel door, slightly ajar. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open, revealing a small, windowless room. Inside stood a lone figure, a man, dressed in a tattered military uniform, his face obscured by shadows. He turned slowly to face me, and I could feel his eyes boring into mine, despite the darkness. "Welcome," he said, his voice hollow and echoing through the room. "We've been expecting you." Fear surged through me as I backed away, but the door slammed shut behind me, plunging the room into darkness. The man's figure began to shimmer and distort, morphing into a grotesque, inhuman shape. "You shouldn't be here," he hissed, the room growing colder with each word. "They won't let you leave." I tried to push past him, but an invisible force held me in place. The walls began to close in, the air thick with a suffocating presence. Desperate, I reached out, but my hand passed through the figure as if he were made of smoke. The room seemed to warp, the boundaries of reality blurring as I felt myself being pulled into a nightmarish vision. Flashes of memories, both my own and those I had uncovered, assaulted my mind. Faces of missing soldiers, twisted and broken by cruel experiments, flickered before my eyes. Voices, distant and tormented, whispered my name, their pleas echoing in my ears. "They are still here. They need you." Gasping for breath, I struggled to regain control, but the facility's grip tightened. The corridor outside the room had vanished, replaced by an endless void of darkness. The tapping sound resumed, louder and more frantic, as unseen forces dragged me deeper into Raven Rock's haunted heart. I found myself running, the corridors stretching infinitely, the layout shifting with each step. Bloodstains reappeared on the walls, fresh and vivid against the gray concrete. The notes I had found earlier multiplied, their ominous messages taunting me. "They are still here. They are watching. They are hunting." Every corner I turned led to another dead end, another room filled with horrors beyond imagination. I could hear footsteps following me, their rhythm matching my own, but every time I glanced behind, no one was there. The facility seemed alive, a living entity determined to keep me within its confines forever. In a moment of clarity amidst the chaos, I realized the true nature of Raven Rock. It wasn't just a facility built for survival, it was a prison designed to contain not just people, but the very essence of fear and despair. The experiments conducted here had gone beyond biological weapons. They had delved into the darkest corners of the human psyche, creating beings fueled by rage and sorrow, forever bound to the underground vault. As exhaustion set in, I collapsed against a wall, the reality of my situation sinking in. The endless corridors, the relentless pursuit, the haunting whispers, they were all part of a macabre experiment, a never-ending loop designed to break the spirit of those who dared to uncover the truth. I was the latest subject, my presence a variable in their twisted study. But giving in wasn't an option. Summoning the last of my strength, I focused on finding a way out, determined to escape the nightmarish cycle. I retraced my steps, searching for any hint of a hidden exit or a forgotten passageway. Each room I entered seemed to mock my efforts, the walls closing in tighter, the shadows growing darker and more menacing. In a final act of desperation, I recalled the notes and the journal entries, piecing together the fragmented information. There had to be a way to disrupt the facility's control, to break free from the endless loop. The key was understanding the true intention behind the experiments, acknowledging the pain and loss, and finding a way to honor the memories of those trapped within. I found myself standing before a massive steel door, the words "Experiment Control" emblazoned above it. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open, revealing a control room filled with outdated technology and scattered papers. The walls were lined with monitors displaying various parts of Raven Rock, each screen showing empty corridors or locked rooms. In the center stood a large console, its surface covered in buttons and switches, many of them broken or missing. As I approached the console, the temperature dropped further, and the oppressive presence of the facility pressed in on me. A final, haunting voice echoed through the room, the remnants of the experiment's creators reaching out to me one last time. "Completion is essential. You must remain." Determined to end the cycle, I began flipping switches and pressing buttons, searching for a way to shut down the facility's control systems. The screens flickered, the facility's grip weakening with each action. The oppressive energy began to dissipate, the shadows receding as light filtered into the room. Suddenly, the console sparked to life, the monitors displaying the faces of those who had been lost within Raven Rock. Their eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of sorrow and hope. "Remember us, honor our memory." Their voices echoed, a final plea for release. With a surge of determination, I pressed the final button, initiating the shutdown sequence. The facility shuddered, the walls vibrating as the control systems powered down. The oppressive presence lifted completely, replaced by a profound silence that spoke of liberation and peace. The heavy steel doors. Story number 3. The Hidden Beneath Denver. I had worked at Denver International Airport for nearly a decade, and I thought I had seen it all. From lost luggage to unruly passengers, nothing fazed me anymore. But the day I was called to investigate a sealed-off corridor in the subterranean levels of the airport changed everything. It was the day I discovered that some secrets are better left buried. It started with a routine maintenance order. The request came through the internal system without much explanation, just a directive to check an old and used section of the airport's sprawling underground complex. Denver International Airport was notorious for its labyrinthine tunnels and operations areas that extended far below ground level. Over the years, conspiracy theories had swirled around the airport, rumors of secret bunkers, occult symbols, and government experiments. I always laughed them off, chalking it up to people's overactive imaginations. But stepping into that corridor, I felt the first twinge of doubt. The entrance was tucked away in the farthest corner of the maintenance sector, past rows of humming machinery and dimly lit halls. The door itself was unremarkable, a plain steel slab with a keypad entry. A layer of dust suggested it hadn't been used in years. My supervisor, Jenkins, handed me the access code without much ceremony. "Just check it out and report back," he said, avoiding eye contact. His usual gruff demeanor seemed muted, almost nervous. "What's down there?" I asked, half joking. "Buried treasure? Aliens?" He gave me a thin smile. "You don't want to know. Just do your job." That should have been my first warning. The door opened with a soft hiss, revealing a dimly lit corridor that stretched far beyond the reach of my flashlight. The air was heavy, stagnant, carrying a faint metallic tang that made my skin crawl. As I stepped inside, the door slid shut behind me with a finality that sent a chill down my spine. The corridor was lined with pipes and conduits, their surfaces corroded from years of neglect. Flickering fluorescent lights cast uneven shadows, giving the space an unsettling, dreamlike quality. Every sound, the creak of my boots, the hum of the lights, the distant drip of water, seemed amplified in the oppressive silence. After about 100 yards, I came to a branching hallway. On the wall was a faded sign with cryptic labels, operations, storage, and secure access. My maintenance order mentioned a sealed area near secure access, so I turned right, following the arrow. The further I went, the more the corridor seemed to change. The walls, once plain concrete, were now adorned with strange symbols etched into the surface, geometric patterns and spirals that seemed to pulse faintly under the flickering lights. My unease grew with each step, but I pushed forward, telling myself it was just an old storage area. Nothing more. Then I found the door. It was massive, far larger than any other in the tunnels, made of reinforced steel with no visible handles or hinges. The surface was covered in more of the strange symbols, intricately carved and interwoven like an ancient language. A keypad and card reader were embedded in the wall beside it, both blinking faintly as if waiting for input. I radioed Jenkins. "I've reached the secure access door. Looks different than I expected." There was a long pause before he replied. "Can you open it?" "Not sure. It has a keypad and card reader." "Do you have a code?" Another pause, longer this time. "No. If it's sealed, leave it." "But..." "Leave it," he snapped. "Report back now." His tone left no room for argument, but curiosity gnawed at me. Something about the door felt wrong, as if it were alive, watching me. Ignoring Jenkins' order, I examined the keypad. To my surprise, it wasn't locked. A single press of the enter button caused the door to groan and slide open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. I hesitated at the threshold, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But something compelled me forward, a mix of curiosity and dread I couldn't shake. The air beyond the door was colder, carrying a faint, acrid smell that stung my nostrils. My flashlight struggled to penetrate the darkness, the beam swallowed by the sheer vastness of what lay below. The staircase seemed to go on forever, each step echoing ominously in the void. As I descended, the walls began to change, shifting from concrete to something smoother, almost organic. I ran my hand along the surface and recoiled. It was warm, pulsating faintly under my touch. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a massive chamber. The ceiling soared high above, shrouded in darkness, while the walls were lined with alcoves containing strange, statue-like figures. They were humanoid in shape but grotesque in detail, elongated limbs, twisted faces frozen in expressions of agony. Their surfaces glistened as if coated in some kind of resin. I shuddered, unsure if they were sculptures or something else. In the center of the chamber was a large, circular table covered in maps and documents. The maps depicted the airport's underground layout, but they extended far beyond anything I'd ever seen, reaching into areas labeled with ominous names like Containment Zone and Threshold. The documents were even stranger, filled with indecipherable symbols and fragmented notes about non-terrestrial entities and dimensional anomalies. A sudden sound broke the silence, a faint scuttling, like claws scraping against metal. My flashlight darted around the room, but I saw nothing. The sound grew louder, closer, accompanied by a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Then the lights began to flicker. Panic set in as shadows danced wildly around me, shapes that didn't belong to anything I could see. I backed away from the table, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The growling grew louder, joined by a cacophony of whispers that seemed to come from every direction. "They're watching," a voice hissed, low and guttural. "They're awake." I turned and ran, my boots pounding against the floor as the chamber seemed to shift and warp around me. The walls pulsed with a sickly light, the statues' faces contorting as if they were alive. The whispers followed me, growing more insistent, more urgent. "You shouldn't have come," they murmured. "You can't leave." I reached the staircase, only to find it blocked by a solid wall of the same organic material that lined the walls. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. My breath came in ragged gasps as I fumbled for my radio. "Jenkins!" I shouted. "I'm trapped. The door is gone, there's something down here." Static crackled in response, followed by a distorted voice that didn't belong to Jenkins. "You opened it. You let them out." The next hours, or maybe days, were a blur of terror. The creatures revealed themselves in glimpses, their forms shifting and amorphous, like living shadows. They stalked me through the endless corridors, their guttural growls echoing in the dark. I found myself in a loop, every path leading back to the central chamber, the table with its cursed maps and documents. Exhaustion set in, and I collapsed against the cold, pulsating wall. The whispers grew louder, a symphony of voices demanding my surrender. "Join us," they chanted. "Become one." I realized then that the bunker wasn't just a shelter, it was a prison, built to contain these entities, whatever they were. And I had broken the seal. Desperation fueled my final act. I grabbed one of the documents from the table, hoping it held some clue to shutting the place down. The symbols burned into my mind as I recited them aloud, the air around me vibrating with energy. The creatures howled in response, their forms writhing and distorting. The chamber began to collapse, the walls folding in on themselves. A blinding light consumed everything, and then, silence. I woke up outside, lying on the tarmac of Denver International Airport. The entrance to the corridor was gone, replaced by an unbroken wall of concrete. My radio crackled to life, Jenkins' voice, frantic. "Where the hell have you been? We've been looking for you for hours." I didn't answer. I couldn't. The memories of what I'd seen, of what I'd unleashed, were too much to process. As I stumbled away, I glanced back at the airport, its towering structure looming against the night sky. I knew I'd never set foot there again. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, and some doors should never be opened. But deep beneath Denver, something still stirs, waiting for the next fool to set it free. Story number 4. The Subterranean Asylum. I've always been a man who loves a good mystery. As a treasure hunter, the thrill of uncovering forgotten relics and hidden histories has been my life's work. But if I'd known what waited for me beneath the soil of Salem, Massachusetts, I would have left that rusted hatch buried in the past, never to be unearthed. It started with a map, as these things often do. I'd come across it at a flea market in a dusty old book titled Massachusetts Oddities, Forgotten Stories of the Bay State. The map was folded between the pages, its corners yellowed with age. Scrawled in shaky handwriting was a cryptic note, for those who seek truth beneath the earth. The map led to a plot of land on the outskirts of Salem, far from the tourist traps and historical landmarks. The area was overgrown and unremarkable, just a patch of woods with no trails and no signs of life. But there, hidden beneath decades of moss and dirt, I found it, a heavy, iron hatch sunk into the ground like a wound in the earth. The rusted bolts resisted at first, but with some leverage and brute force, they gave way, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into darkness. The air that wafted up was damp and stale, carrying the faint metallic tang of decay. It wasn't the inviting kind of adventure I usually craved, but curiosity had its hooks in me. I strapped on my headlamp, adjusted my pack, and began my descent. The stairs went deeper than I expected, the cool air thickening as I descended. Each step echoed, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence below. When I reached the bottom, I found myself in a long, narrow corridor lined with peeling, water-stained walls. The faint glow of my headlamp revealed the remnants of a place long abandoned, broken furniture, shattered light fixtures, and scraps of paper scattered across the floor. It didn't take long to realize what this place had been. Rusted gurneys lined the hallway, their leather straps still intact. The walls were adorned with faded signs that read therapy wing and rehabilitation rooms. A shiver ran down my spine as I pieced it together. This was a mental asylum. But why underground? And why had it been sealed off? The deeper I ventured, the darker the story became. Old medical charts lay strewn about, their ink smudged but still legible. The patients had been labeled not by name but by numbers, stripped of their identities. The descriptions were chilling. Patient 14, severe hysteria, non-responsive to treatment. Another read, Patient 22, violent tendencies, subjected to isolation therapy. The rooms themselves were worse. Tiny, windowless cells lined the corridors, their doors fitted with small viewing slits. Inside, I found the remnants of lives forgotten, tattered bedding, scratched walls, and the occasional personal artifact, a child's toy, a frayed book, a faded photograph. One room contained a chair with restraints, its leather cracked and stained. The air grew colder, the silence heavier, as though the very walls were watching me. Then I found the tapes. In a small office labeled administrator, I discovered a dusty reel-to-reel tape recorder sitting on a desk. Beside it was a box of tapes, each labeled with dates from the 1950s and 60s. My hands trembled as I loaded the first tape and pressed play. A man's voice crackled to life, calm and detached. Patient 7. Day 14 of isolation therapy. Subject shows increased agitation, characterized by repetitive vocalizations. In the background, a muffled scream rose, long and guttural, before cutting off abruptly. Administering secondary treatment, the voice continued, utterly devoid of emotion. Restraints applied. Subject remains non-compliant. The recording ended with a click. My stomach churned as I loaded the next tape, and then another. Each one revealed the same pattern, cold, clinical observations paired with the anguished cries of patients. The tapes weren't medical records, they were confessions of cruelty. I couldn't stop listening, morbid curiosity pushing me forward. But as I played the final tape, the background noise changed. The screams were gone, replaced by whispers, soft, barely audible. I leaned closer to the recorder, straining to hear. "They're still here," the whispers said. "They never left." The hairs on my neck stood on end as the whispers seemed to seep out of the recorder, filling the room. I turned off the tape and backed away, my headlamp casting wild shadows on the walls. The air had grown colder, and for the first time, I felt truly afraid. That's when I heard it, the faint sound of footsteps echoing down the hall. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is someone there?" No answer. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, growing louder with each passing second. I grabbed my flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness, but the corridor was empty. A low whisper reached my ears, close enough to make me flinch. "Why did you come?" I spun around, the flashlight shaking in my grip. The hallway behind me was just as empty, but the whispers persisted, growing louder, overlapping until they became a cacophony of voices. They heard us. They left us here. They forgot us. The voices came from everywhere and nowhere, their anguish palpable. Panic surged through me as I stumbled back into the corridor, my flashlight flickering. I needed to leave, but the way back seemed to twist and shift, the hall stretching into endless tunnels. That's when I saw them. At first, they were just shadows, dark shapes flitting at the edges of my vision. But as I moved, they became clearer. Figures in hospital gowns, their faces obscured by darkness, their movements unnatural. They stood silently at the ends of the hallways, watching me, waiting. One by one, they began to move, their footsteps echoing in unison. The closer they came, the more I could see their faces, gaunt, hollow eyes and mouths frozen in silent screams. They reached out with skeletal hands, their whispers growing louder. "Stay with us," they said. "Don't leave us." I ran. My breath came in ragged gasps as I fled through the labyrinthine corridors, the walls seeming to close in around me. Every turn brought me face to face with more of them, their eyes burning with anger and sorrow. The air was heavy with their presence, each step harder than the last. Finally, I stumbled into a large chamber, a treatment room, judging by the rows of rusted chairs and broken machines. In the center of the room stood a single figure, taller than the others, dressed in a doctor's coat. His face was pale and expressionless, his eyes fixed on me. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice hollow. "They've been waiting." The shadows closed in, their whispers rising to a deafening roar. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head as their voices overwhelmed me. "You must stay. You must join us." I don't remember how I escaped. My next memory is of sunlight streaming through the trees, the hatch behind me sealed as if it had never been opened. My clothes were torn, my hands bloodied, and my mind a fractured mess. I drove back to my motel in silence, the whispers still echoing in my ears. For weeks, I tried to make sense of what I'd experienced. I searched for records of the asylum, but they were sparse, just rumors and speculation, buried beneath decades of silence. The tapes I'd taken from the vault were blank, their contents erased as if they'd never existed. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. The asylum is still down there, hidden beneath the earth, its halls echoing with the pain of those who were forgotten. And the shadows, they're waiting for someone else to find them. If you ever come across an old map leading to Salem's outskirts, do yourself a favor, burn it. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, and some doors should never be opened. Because once you step into the darkness, you might never find your way out. Story number 5. The Nevada Test Site Vault. I've spent most of my life chasing answers. As a nuclear physicist, the questions I ask usually revolve around the nature of matter and energy, things that can be measured, studied, understood. But what my team and I discovered beneath the scorched earth of the Nevada Test Site was something far beyond the realm of science. It was something primal, something that defied explanation. We were called to the site as part of a government initiative to assess radiation levels and decommission test areas. The Nevada Test Site, sprawling across miles of desolate desert, was a monument to humanity's hubris, a place where the United States had detonated over 1,000 nuclear devices during the Cold War. The ground there was scarred, the air heavy with history and secrets. Our team was small: myself, Dr. James Harlow, Dr. Marissa Cortez, an environmental scientist, Alex Lee, a geologist, and 2 field technicians, Sarah and Dan. We were told our task was straightforward: measure residual radiation, document environmental recovery, and leave. But as with all things tied to government projects, there was more beneath the surface. We arrived on a blistering June morning, the sun glaring down as if determined to bleach the landscape of its sins. The test site stretched out in all directions, a barren expanse punctuated by craters and crumbling structures. A military escort led us to a central compound, where we were briefed by a man named Colonel Bennett. He was grizzled and curt, his face lined with secrets he clearly had no intention of sharing. "There's a facility beneath Sector 12, he explained, gesturing to a map. "It's been sealed since the late 1960s. Your job is to assess the structural integrity and gather any data left behind. Do not touch anything you don't understand. And under no circumstances are you to enter unauthorized areas." His words hung heavy in the air, but none of us questioned him. This was the military, after all. Questions were met with silence, and curiosity was a liability. Sector 12 was a wasteland within a wasteland, a vast cratered area surrounded by barbed wire and weathered warning signs. The ground here felt different, almost hollow, as if the earth itself was unwilling to support the weight of what lay below. At the center of the sector, partially buried beneath debris, was a steel hatch. The hatch was massive, its surface scarred and pitted as if it had endured decades of weathering. It bore a faded insignia, something that looked like a combination of a radiation symbol and a government seal. Sarah and Dan worked to clear the debris, revealing a keypad and locking mechanism. To our surprise, the keypad was still functional, its faint green light blinking in the harsh sunlight. "Looks like someone wanted to keep this place locked tight," Marissa said, her voice tinged with unease. The colonel handed us a piece of paper with a code. "The vault's been sealed since '69. This is the only way in." Dan punched in the code, and with a groan of protest, the hatch began to open. A rush of cold, stale air greeted us, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of decay. A narrow staircase descended into darkness, the metal steps rusted and slick with condensation. "Here we go," Alex muttered, flicking on his flashlight. His voice carried a nervous edge that matched the knot tightening in my stomach. The bunker was a labyrinth of steel and concrete, its walls adorned with peeling paint and faded signs. The deeper we went, the more the air seemed to change, heavier, colder, laced with a faint metallic tang. Our Geiger counters clicked softly, a reminder of the ever-present radiation that had seeped into every crevice. We began in what appeared to be an administrative area. Desks and filing cabinets stood in eerie stillness, papers scattered across the floor. Most of the documents were mundane, logbooks, shift schedules, but some hinted at something darker. One folder contained photographs of men and women in hospital gowns, their faces obscured but their expressions unmistakable: fear, pain, resignation. "What the hell were they doing down here?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't have an answer. None of us did. As we moved deeper into the facility, the signs of abandonment became more pronounced. Lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows that seemed to shift when we weren't looking. The air grew colder, and the Geiger counters began to click faster. We found the first signs of the experiments in a large chamber labeled subject containment. Rows of glass-walled cells lined the room, each one containing a single, rusted chair bolted to the floor. The walls of the cells were scratched and scarred, as if whoever had been inside had clawed at them in desperation. "Jesus," Alex muttered, peering into one of the cells. "This is like something out of a nightmare." Marissa pointed to a control panel at the far end of the room. Its screens were shattered, but one still flickered faintly, displaying a single word: anomaly. "What anomaly?" I asked aloud, though I doubted anyone had the answer. The first true horror came when we discovered the recordings. In a small room labeled observation, we found a stack of reel-to-reel tapes and a playback machine. Marissa, ever curious, loaded one and pressed play. At first, there was static. Then a voice emerged, calm and clinical. Experiment 47. Subject exposure to neutron radiation at 200 rems. Initial results promising: heightened neural activity, increased cellular regeneration. The voice paused, replaced by the sound of someone screaming. It was a raw, guttural sound, the kind that made your skin crawl. The voice continued, unfazed. Subject exhibiting signs of spatial disorientation. Speech incoherent. Physical transformation accelerating. The tape ended abruptly, leaving us in stunned silence. They were experimenting on people, Marissa said, her face pale. They were trying to weaponize radiation. As we pressed further into the bunker, the atmosphere grew more oppressive. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with something I can only describe as malevolence. That's when we saw the first figure. It was in the distance, barely visible in the dim light, a humanoid shape, its skin blackened and cracked as if burned. It didn't move at first, just stood there, watching us. Then it took a step forward, its movements jerky and unnatural. "Is that a person?" Alex asked, his voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, the figure vanished, dissolving into the shadows. But the moment it disappeared, the Geiger counters went wild, their rapid clicking filling the silence like an alarm. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said, backing away. "Now." But leaving wasn't an option. The way back had changed, the corridors twisting and shifting like a living thing. Every turn led us deeper, the walls now covered in black scorch marks and strange symbols carved into the concrete. The figures began to appear more frequently, always at the edges of the light. Their forms were twisted, their faces featureless save for hollow, burning eyes. They moved with a purpose, their presence suffocating, as if they carried the weight of the radiation that had consumed them. "They're stuck," Marissa said, her voice shaking. "They're trapped in time, or something. And they want us to join them," I added grimly. The final horror came in the reactor room, a massive chamber dominated by a cracked, humming core that pulsed with an eerie blue light. The figures surrounded it, their movements synchronized, their whispers filling the air. "Stay," they murmured, their voices overlapping. "Stay with us." The light from the reactor grew brighter, enveloping the room in a blinding glow. I felt my body grow heavy, my mind slipping away as the whispers grew louder. But then Marissa grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "Don't look at it. We have to move." With every ounce of strength, we turned and ran, the figures pursuing us through the twisting corridors. The air burned, the walls trembled, and the whispers became screams. We finally stumbled out of the bunker, collapsing on the scorched earth as the hatch slammed shut behind us. The figures didn't follow, but their presence lingered, a heavy weight in the air. To this day, I can still hear their whispers, especially at night. The government sealed the site again, burying it beneath layers of concrete and denial. But I know the truth. They're still down there, the forgotten victims of humanity's ambition, trapped in an endless loop of suffering. And they're waiting for the next fool to set them free. Story number 6. The Unseen Sanctuary. I had always found peace in isolation. As a field biologist, the vast wilderness of Yellowstone National Park was my sanctuary, a place where I could escape the noise of the world and immerse myself in the delicate symphony of nature. But the peace I cherished was shattered the day I stumbled upon the bunker. I wasn't looking for trouble. My assignment was simple: collect samples from a remote section of the park to study the effects of climate change on native plant species. Armed with my gear, I trekked deep into the woods, far from the well-trodden trails and bustling campsites. The forest grew denser, the towering pines casting long shadows that danced in the dappled sunlight. It was the kind of beauty that felt eternal, untouched by human hands. But as I ventured further, the wilderness began to change. The air grew colder, the silence more profound. Even the birds seemed reluctant to sing here. That's when I saw it, a faint trail leading off the map, overgrown and hidden by fallen branches. Curiosity got the better of me, as it always did, and I decided to follow it. The trail ended abruptly in a clearing, and there, half buried beneath moss and dirt, was a hatch. It was made of thick steel, its surface scarred by time and weather. A rusted plaque was bolted to the hatch, the lettering faded but still legible: Sanctuary 17. Authorized personnel only. I hesitated, my instincts warning me to turn back. But something about the hatch called to me. Maybe it was the mystery of it. What was this doing here, miles away from civilization? Maybe it was the promise of discovery, the kind that could make my career. Whatever it was, I couldn't resist. After a few minutes of clearing debris and applying some muscle, I managed to pry the hatch open. A rush of stale, cold air hit me, carrying with it a faint metallic tang. Below, a narrow staircase descended into darkness, its edges lined with corroded railings. I flicked on my flashlight, adjusted my pack, and began my descent. The stairs seemed to go on forever, each step creaking under my weight. The deeper I went, the colder it became, until I could see my breath misting in the beam of my flashlight. At the bottom, I found myself in a narrow corridor lined with steel walls, the air thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something faintly sweet and cloying, like decayed fruit. The bunku was eerily silent, the kind of silence that presses on your ears and makes your heart race. I moved cautiously, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. The corridor opened into a larger room, filled with rows of metal desks and shelves stacked with old equipment. Dust covered everything, a testament to how long this place had been abandoned. But it wasn't entirely lifeless. On one of the desks lay an open notebook, its pages yellowed with age. The handwriting was neat but hurried, as if written by someone in a state of growing panic. July 17, 1984. The virus is unlike anything we've seen before. It doesn't just infect the body, it infiltrates the mind, bending it to its will. The host retains fragments of their personality, but they are no longer themselves. They become something else. Something that serves only the virus. July 20th, 1984. Containment has failed. The protocol was clear: if exposure occurs, the bunku is to remain sealed. But not everyone agreed. Dr. Hughes tried to leave. He didn't make it. July 23rd, 1984. We're out of time. I can feel it in my own thoughts, like a shadow creeping into the corners of my mind. We've sealed the doors from the inside. This place will be our tomb. I set the notebook down, my hands trembling. A virus that controlled the mind? It sounded like something out of a horror movie, not a scientific report. But the fear etched into those words was unmistakable. This wasn't fiction. It was a warning. I pressed on, the weight of the notebook's revelations heavy on my mind. The next room I entered was a laboratory, its walls lined with cabinets and counters cluttered with equipment. Glass vials and petri dishes lay shattered on the floor, their contents long dried. A whiteboard stood in the corner, covered in hastily scrawled notes and diagrams. The word propagator was circled in red, with arrows pointing to phrases like neural override and cognitive disintegration. As I examined the board, I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the distinct feeling of being watched. I turned sharply, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, but the room was empty. Then I heard it, a faint shuffling sound, like footsteps dragging across the floor. It came from the corridor behind me, growing louder with each passing second. My heart pounded as I backed away, my flashlight trembling in my grip. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness. No response. The shuffling continued, closer now, accompanied by a low, guttural noise that sent chills down my spine. I darted into the nearest room and closed the door, pressing my ear against the cold steel. The noises grew louder, then stopped abruptly. I held my breath, straining to hear anything beyond the pounding of my own heart. Then came the whisper. "Stay." The voice was faint, almost a sigh, but it was enough to send me into a panic. I turned to find myself in what appeared to be a storage room. Metal shelves lined the walls, filled with canisters, files, and, horrifyingly, rows of glass jars containing what looked like preserved human tissue. The sight was grotesque, but it was the smell that nearly broke me, a sickly sweet odor that clung to the air, making my stomach churn. On one of the shelves, I found another notebook, this one smaller and more personal. The entries were shorter, fragmented, as if the writer's thoughts had been slipping away. August 3rd, 1984. I can feel it inside me. It whispers when I close my eyes. It shows me things I don't want to see. August 5th, 1984. We were wrong to think we could control it. The virus isn't just a pathogen. It's alive. It wants to spread. It wants us to obey. August 7th, 1984. I can't trust my thoughts anymore. The others are gone. Or maybe they're not. I hear them in the dark. They want me to join them. A sudden bang jolted me from the notebook, the sound echoing through the bunku. It came from the corridor, followed by a scraping noise that set my teeth on edge. Whatever was out there, it wasn't human, not anymore. I turned off my flashlight, plunging the room into darkness. My breathing was shallow, my pulse hammering in my ears. The scraping grew louder, followed by a wet, choking sound that made my skin crawl. Then I saw it. Through the crack in the door, I caught a glimpse of movement, a figure shuffling past, its silhouette barely human. Its skin was dark and mottled, its limbs jerking unnaturally. It stopped for a moment, its head tilting as if sniffing the air, before continuing down the hall. I waited until the sounds faded before slipping out of the room, every muscle in my body screaming for me to run. But running would make noise, and noise would draw them, whatever they were. I moved as quietly as I could, retracing my steps toward the stairs. The bunku felt different now, as if it were alive, the walls closing in around me. The air was thick with the whispers, growing louder with each step. They weren't just words, they were feelings, emotions, memories that weren't mine. "You can't leave," the whispers said. "You belong to us now." When I finally reached the stairs, my relief was short-lived. Standing at the base was one of them, its twisted body illuminated by the faint glow of the emergency lights. Its head snapped toward me, and for a moment, I saw its face, or what was left of it. Empty eyes, a gaping mouth, and skin stretched taut over exposed muscle. It lunged. I turned and ran, the sounds of its pursuit echoing behind me. The corridors blurred as I sprinted, my only thought to escape. I burst through the hatch into the blinding sunlight, collapsing onto the forest floor as the hatch slammed shut behind me. I never went back. The forest reclaimed the trail, and I told no one about what I had found. But the whispers still haunt me, their voices a constant reminder of what lies beneath Yellowstone. The bunku wasn't a sanctuary. It was a prison. And something is still inside, waiting.